Welcome to the Irish Baptist College podcast, Let's Talk. We have a few standalone episodes for you before we launch a new season in 2025. I just want to remind you there's a full catalogue of episodes for you to explore, so make sure you check them out. But this side of Christmas, there's going to be just a few standalone episodes. I'm your host, Davy Ellison. I'm the Director of Training at the college. And I'm here with the principal of the college, Dr. Jonathan McClaughlin. So good to see you today, John.
Good to be here, Davy. Thanks for the invitation.
No problem. You might not be thanking me for the invitation by the end of this.
Sure.
So this is a different episode than we've... Normally, I come with a list of questions for whoever sitting on the other side of the desk. I've no questions at this stage. But we're going to have a conversation, or attempt to have a conversation,
Sure.
See if we can elongate it for 20, 25 minutes. Earlier in the semester, we had an open lecture. Liam Garvey from Charlotte Chapel was with us, and he talked about raising leaders, developing leaders, how we go about that in terms of training. And so that sparked a number of conversations among pastors and among ourselves as staff here at the college, just how we go about that and how we think about that. So today we're going to talk about raising up leaders, and I've asked you to come with four things to talk about. I have 4 things to talk about. So we're just gonna see what's on your list. It might match mine, it might not, and we'll just have a conversation back and forward and see how this goes. So listeners, forgive us if this is a bit
grace. We need grace.
So as I asked you to think about raising up leaders, what was one of the first things that came to your mind?
Yeah, I think reflecting on what Liam Garvey shared with us from Charlotte Chapel, he said it takes a church to train a gospel worker. So the question I'd like us to think through, Davy, is how can we as members, pastors, elders, deacons, identify and cultivate gift in the local church? I'd love us to think about that, Davy, because that's, I think, where the rubber hits the road. How can we as local church members, pastors, elders, deacons, identify and then think about cultivating gifts? Sort of 2 questions, but they go together. So over to you, Davy.
I was going to say, do you have any thoughts on that?
You want me to go first?
Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
I think it's a challenge, so I'll start there.
We're agreed on that.
Yeah, because anybody that is serving the Lord in church is normally quite busy.
Yeah.
They juggle many things, particularly those that are not employed by the church. And even those that are employed, many people are juggling a lot. So sometimes I think the training of gospel workers, while nobody would deny that it's not important, it's just the tyranny of the urgent. They fight the fires that are directly in front of them this day, this week, this month.
Sure.
And so even though they know it's vitally important, because it's not staring them in the face in the present, it will do 10 years from now or 15 years from now when you're saying, well, where's the next generation?
Yeah.
And they're not there.
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge, Davy. So I'll pass over to you to think about.
Well, I think one of the things I thought about might feed into this conversation, and that was about keeping discipleship on the agenda of a church. So I don't know if this is an unfair characterization, but my experience has been that often we are more focused on seeing people converted than seeing people grow in Christ. I just think about my experience in prayer meetings. You hear people praying for conversion all the time, and we want to pray for that, but rarely do we hear people praying that we would grow in Christ, that we would mature, that we would continue to demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit, all of that. And so I think as churches we need to be more thoughtful about keeping discipleship on the agenda, because I think it's from those discipleship contexts that leaders then begin to emerge. And once a leader emerges, the church kind of does get behind that and encourages that and supports that. But if discipleship was on the agenda more frequently, I think that would help dissipate the tyranny of the urgent and help us see what's more important. And And look, I can happily think of lots of Christians who have matured greatly through their Christian life, but I can think of other Christians who have been Christians for 3 or 4 decades and are really still just babes in Christ because they were converted, joined the church, and then they've just sat in the church, and nobody's taken the time to come alongside them and help them grow and mature. And if we don't do that, then we're not going to see leaders emerge if we're not helping young Christians grow and develop. I think the difficulty is, I don't know what your experience has been, Johnny. Whenever we think about discipleship, we think about something very structured and intense rather than kind of just natural relationships that should develop in church life.
No, I totally agree. Another angle that I have often thought about is we as church leaders need to push through our insecurities. So sometimes in church life, we naturally, well, I can do it and I think I can do it okay, or I know one of the other church leaders can do it and they can do it okay. So as leaders, to actually push past our own insecurities to go, somebody else might be able to do this.
Yeah.
And even if they do it and it's not as good as we could do it, but they're only starting out on the journey, I think we have to push through our own insecurities. And I also think churches have to be willing to go, we'll take, for example, a young man preparing for the pastorate. The way he preaches at 23, you would hope would be totally different as the way he preaches at 33.
Yeah, for sure.
But he has to start somewhere. And the congregation have to be willing to embrace that young man as a 23-year-old in the same way that embrace him in a different way as a 33-year-old. So I think church leaders have to push through our insecurities. Definitely. And I think we as church members need to push past our preferences.
Definitely, yeah. Tim Challies wrote a blog a while ago, something along the lines of why I like listening to bad sermons. Okay. And it was exactly that point. You need to let guys have a go, and it might be a bad sermon, but if it's their first, they have the opportunity to do that and to grow. So that definitely for leaders and for congregations, that'll be a good piece to read and reflect in terms of giving people opportunity. Yeah.
So, Davy, one thing I would like us to think about and talk about is the role of the church and the role of a college. I mean, we serve here in the Irish Baptist College, but we also have roles in local churches as pastors and elders. Yeah. Lots of people have opinions on who's doing what. So what should we be doing as churches, and what should the college be doing as we seek this one goal of training? Do we have two different roles, or are they symbiotic, or are they dislocated, or... Yeah. Another easy question.
They're symbiotic, or they should be. Yeah. You know, so the church and the college have to work together. They should work together. And I think we do that pretty well here at the Irish Baptist College and association churches. I think maybe the way the college has been set up as part of the association belonging to the churches, it's not a standalone entity, helps that. But it's not always clear in people's minds. I think, I don't want to speak for you, Johnny, but I think we're in agreement.
You are the host.
We are in agreement that the college does not produce pastors, that the churches produce pastors. What the college does is help. And the way the college helps is by offering things that a local church can't. So the college can't put someone in a difficult counselling situation. That's something that just happens.
The church
in the local
will help
church.
Them with that.
The church will help.
Yeah.
But the church is unlikely to have someone who can teach Hebrew or teach Greek or understand church history to the same ability that some of our staff do. And so what we do is have expertise that come in alongside, help teach what a local church can't, to supplement the experiences that guys are having in the local church. And I think our program, the Preparation for Ministry program, evidences this, because it's not all academic classes. There's placements throughout that. There's practical classes. And so what we're saying is we can teach you so much in the classroom, but the rest has got to be learned in real life scenarios. And so we want you to go on placement and see what it's like to watch a pastor a church and see the realities of that. So I think it's both the college and the church need to work together on that.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, Davy, I know so many of my own experiences, or indeed hearing of other people, particularly if they're with, say, a pastor and they're being taken out on counselling situations, the car journey there and the car journey back, you might have a young aspirational gospel worker said, I heard in college, which is good, theoretical, maybe often good practical advice as well, as they go to a counselling scenario, sit in the counselling scenario, and then talk about what actually happened in 2024 in that counselling scenario. So the college has helped them think, and then when they get into a real life situation, they see how that thinking is then fleshed out in modern day ministry.
Yeah, for sure. And some of those thorny situations are a lot more black and white when you're sitting in the classroom here than they are when you're sitting in a sofa in someone's living room.
Yes.
Becomes a lot grayer. Yeah. Okay. Well, do you have...
Back to you, Davy. I think that I've batted the ball back.
I'm going for a wee bit more nuts and bolts, I think.
Okay.
So maybe this is a word for leaders. I think the other thing about raising up future leaders is that you have to set goals that are realistic and attainable. So if you're in a church and you're pastoring 40 members, I don't think you should set a goal of raising up 10 new pastors in the next 10 years, because you're never going to... well, the Lord might bless and it might happen, but you got to set goals that are realistic and attainable, aiming for something that we can actually do. And then when it's accomplished, what an encouragement for the church. So small goals like, can we send one person to college in the next 5 years, and can we see them then enter gospel service? And if a church can do that, that'd be great. And even if half our churches in the association did that, within 5 years we would have sent 60 people into gospel service. So those small goals, I think sometimes we sit back and we think, we got to raise up leaders. We need future, and maybe not even just future pastors, but future elders for this local congregation, future ministry leaders. And we think, oh well, we've got 15 ministries. We need a team of 8 elders. We're never going to find that many people. Well, actually, start smaller and see the Lord work in that way. Be realistic, because I think that brings joy and encouragement whenever those targets are met. I don't know how that sits with you, John.
I think, many leadership people say start with the end in mind. So if you're saying, we as a small Baptist church want to produce a gospel worker in the next 5 years, that is, as you say, that's your goal. And then you've got to say, right, we now then need to develop a road or a pathway, which will mean maybe some midweek prayer meetings, getting somebody up to speak, or maybe it's developing them in youth ministry, children's ministry, just bringing them in to read good books together. Starting, as you say, start with the end in mind, and then you'll start to develop a pathway.
And I think also to realise that you might be aiming for something and something else might happen, and that's not failure. So if you set out to see one gospel worker sent out into vocational service, and what you end up with is a lay elder in your church, that's not failure. That's just you've raised up a new leader. Okay, they don't go into vocational ministry; they stay in your location and serve as a lay elder. But that's a great benefit then to the local church. And so it's a little bit about trying something and see what comes of it. And it might not be the end goal you were aiming for, but the outcome might be just as profitable to Christ's kingdom, just in a different way than what you expected it to be.
I agree with that, David, and would also take it even a wee step further to go, are we in our churches praying for God to do it? Pray to the Lord of the harvest to raise up workers. And it's amazing, even just reflecting my own experience, that sometimes there can be a lack of prayerlessness, in terms of praying that God will do it. Not just missionaries, which are great gospel workers, but also more evangelists in our local congregation, more members being sent out into culture, future elders, pastors, deacons, and actually for it to be part of our prayer meetings, to pray.
Definitely.
Because that's what the Lord's asked us to do.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure.
David, can I then touch on this subject? So the Lord has raised up someone, which is great. And they say, do you know what? The local church is great. I know it takes a whole church to produce a gospel worker, as Liam Garvey said. But then they think, I would like to go to the Irish Baptist College. What are some of the challenges that, say, a young man or a young woman that's been employed in a job, what's the pathway ahead of them? What are the challenges on that pathway?
Yeah, many challenges. Yeah, the reality is that the theological training is difficult, and I suppose the challenges are unique to every person. There's obviously a financial challenge, in terms of stepping out of work and coming full time as a student. That's a financial challenge, depending on your circumstances. So, single person might be able to deal with that a little bit easier than, someone who's married and has young children. So there's that kind of challenge. There's a challenge of returning to study. So the majority of our students are mature students. Now, lots of them have done a university degree before, maybe worked a few years and then are coming back. But there's lots who haven't. And so that kind of going back to study and 4-day routine and all of that kind of stuff. Guys coming from manual labour jobs to then sitting in a classroom. There's that kind of challenge. I think there's the challenge of just feeling competent and equipped for that. You can very quickly feel like you're out of your depth, which I think is a common experience for all of our first years in the first kind of 5-6 weeks. I also think there can be a bit of a challenge in terms of support from a local church. How do you support your students who are studying at college, aiming for vocational ministry? Do you pray for them regularly in their hearing? Do you ask them how that's going? Do you hear reports from them in front of the church body? And so an individual feeling like they're not just doing this off their own bat, but actually there's a church standing with them, sending them. And I think that's maybe one of the biggest things that one of the things I'd like to see change a little bit, I think, in applications. Lots of people are talking to the college before they're talking to their church. And often whenever they're kind of coming to us talking about that, we're kind of saying, well, have you spoken to your church? What do they think? How do they feel about it? And it'd be great if applicants would speak to their churches earlier. But it would be great if churches were actually approaching people and saying, look, we see gifting in you. You need to think about pursuing this and we'll stand with you. And there's a variety of different ways that churches can then stand with individuals. Yeah, you probably have other challenges in mind.
No, they're great. And I suppose I'm the one that has raised the challenges, but just also to say my own personal experience and watching people this year and last year, and indeed just in my wider context and pastoral ministry, that's part of the process, Davy. I think that the Lord presents the challenges and that through His grace and His bountiful provision at the point of need brings the help, but He does that through God's people. He doesn't necessarily do it through the college. He does it through the very thing that His own Son promised to build and bless, the church. And the church gets behind this young gospel worker or old gospel worker to keep them going, to keep encouraging them through the challenges.
For sure. And I think this is one of the things we really wrestle with. On the one hand, you want people to step out in faith and to see the Lord's provision. And I think that's part of the test. Are you willing to trust God when things are hard and whenever it doesn't kind of add up to what you're thinking about? But I think the other side is that we do have responsibility to care for people who are sacrificing much to pursue vocational ministry. And so it's hard to get that balance. It's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Davy, I think I've lobbed a number of the grenades. Have you one or two left before?
Well, I'm going to come back to something you said earlier, which I had noted down. I think sometimes one of the challenges in raising up leaders is that leaders in churches are slow to do that for a number of reasons, whether that's kind of insecurities in themselves. I'm afraid of giving this guy an opportunity and he shows me up because he's more gifted, or just that I love preaching, so I don't want to give up any preaching opportunities, because I love doing that, and it's a passion. I don't know how you have kind of wrestled with that in your ministry, but I think that can be a challenge that, and sometimes it's a little bit like, well, the church are paying me to do these things, so maybe are they going to raise questions if actually, one Sunday a month I don't preach, so that other guys can have opportunity? Or so I think that can be in people's minds.
Yeah, just to comment on that, Davy, I think to love to preach is one thing, to love the people to whom you preach is another.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think if someone says, I'm a pastor and I love preaching, as you love the people to whom you preach, surely God by his Spirit through his word is building up the body. And God by his Spirit is stirring up the gifts.
Yeah.
And so surely actually one of the great blessings of that pastor's preaching ministry must surely be that he's igniting the gifts in people. So I would say surely one of their greatest privileges is to sit back and see somebody fanning into flame the gift that has been stirred up through their ministry. So I would encourage a pastor to preach less, to ultimately see God's kingdom being built through their ministry. Sadly, Davy, we don't have the time, but we can go into church history where there were many famous pastors who preached every service and then they left and the church dwindles and sometimes they turn the lights out. Whereas there are other models of churches where there have been famous preachers and pastors who did the majority of the preaching, but they relinquished the pulpit so that other people could use their gifts, so that the body would continue to be built up. So I would challenge that pastor to go, it's good to love preaching, but to love the people to whom you preach, and the church that Jesus promised to build and bless is more important.
And I think as well for the pastor, I think it's really helpful. Most churches will outlast the pastor who's in the pulpit, and you got to think about how am I going to sustain this church beyond my ministry, or help them to be sustained beyond my ministry, and that's a little bit of relinquishing that. I think a word for congregations is that I think primarily the pastor's role is to equip the saints for ministry, not to do the ministry for the saints, but to equip us for ministry, and so I think it's important to keep that on board. Any final words for pastors thinking about raising up leaders? And
Kevin DeYoung, I think, wrote a book, didn't he say, Just Do Something? Wasn't it, Kevin?
Did you read my notes?
Okay. I may have seen them over your shoulder, did I? Because you wouldn't want anybody to feel totally discouraged by this.
No.
And maybe we all, to one degree or another, do.
Yeah.
But actually to feel the prompting maybe of the Spirit now to go, well, maybe at my next office bearers meeting, or maybe my next elders meeting, depending on what position the person has at the church, or even in ladies ministry and their committees or youth ministry, to actually go, is there someone here that I could start to just build a relationship with, start to, as you say, disciple, maybe just in a soft way, just by talking to them, giving them literature, but actually just start the process, just start to put one foot in front of the other with the goal to see vocational and non-vocational people equipped for works of service. I think that's key. Much better investing in one person than sitting in your study dreaming about investing in 5 people. And just to do that, to act on that. Great. I think the only thing I'd add is that if there are church leaders, pastors, elders thinking about this, wrestling with this, just to encourage you to reach out to us. And the college is here to serve our churches, and we would love to be able to serve you in helping you raise up leaders. And we have courses. We've talked a lot about the undergraduate preparation for ministry course. We have master's program, and we have the evening class program as well that caters for a wide variety of different types of people. So there's lots on offer where we can come alongside your church and help you equip people for ministry and see leaders raised. Any final words? Just as I said, encourage people to do this, because it's the church not just of today, but it's a church of tomorrow. And for our children and our grandchildren and our nephews and nieces, we got to start this process now, because the Lord's still building his church and we want to partner with him in that for the future.
Great. Thanks, Johnny. Well, I think we got through that new format okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, listeners, for your patience and for joining us. Just want to encourage you to follow us on social media. That'll help keep you up to date with everything that's happening and taking place at the college, and everything that you can benefit from the college. And we appreciate your partnership as we continue to magnify Christ, advance the gospel, and strengthen the church. Thank you.